time period 600 BCE to 600 CE is considered the classical age. It's very, very important to the AP exam. I guarantee you will have an essay that will go back into this time period. It may not necessarily be just this time period. It will probably expand beyond this time period, but you have to understand the classical age empires. Key concept 2.1, the development and codification of religious and cultural traditions. You have to understand that there were already existing religious traditions, but things changed in this time period where we develop more organized religions, and these religions have an ethical code. Two examples of ethical religions that teach ethical, meaning that they teach behavior and how you are supposed to act in this world, are Judaism and Hinduism. Judaism and Hinduism are both ethnic religions. They are religions that you are born into. You do not necessarily convert. There are people who convert into Judaism, but it's very rare. Judaism is an ethical monotheistic religion, meaning that it has the belief in one God. It is one of the first of its kind to believe in one God. It was begun by a guy named Abraham, who was a pastoralist in Mesopotamia. He was he had an interaction with capital G-O-D, God, who told him to teach everyone that there was one true God, and that that people needed to give up their pagan gods and their animistic beliefs. As a result of the development of Judaism as a cultural group, they started to create political power as well. So the Jews became political empires under both Solomon and David. They expanded throughout modern day Israel and into Palestine and Syria, Jordan, a lot of those Middle Eastern territories. Obviously, their capital city was Jerusalem, where Solomon built a big temple. God was actually housed in this temple in what was called the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant also housed the Ten Commandments found by Moses. The Babylonian Empire, who was polytheistic and animistic, are going to conquer the majority of the Mesopotamian region, which you should remember from the previous time period. This created what was called the Jewish Diaspora. The Jews spread throughout all of the Middle East. Many of them were being held captive by the Babylonians in different regions. If you know your biblical history, we're talking about Daniel in the lion's den in that time period. And the Jews are also going to basically have to find a new way to practice their religion. One of the things that they do is they create what's called the synagogue. Jewish traditions and Jewish law requires for the people to worship together. It's a congregational worship religion, and you have to have a certain number of people. You have to have a certain amount of genders represented. It's very complex and very law-oriented religion. And so in order to practice that religion, they had to find a way to worship their God without having the temple. And the temple was the center of their worship, and so now they had to find a new way to do that. They do that by creating new written documents called the Talmud. The Talmud is a Jewish holy book which includes the Ten Commandments and all the books of the laws. All the laws that include what you can eat, what you can wear, what you can say, what you can do, what you can drink, all kinds of very, very specific laws and how Jews are supposed to conduct themselves in this world. The Jews obviously never really recover from this diaspora. They end up wandering throughout all of Europe and the Middle East, and especially into Russia. And they have a very turbulent history leading up to obviously the Holocaust. Today, the Holy Land is now controlled by a state called Israel. The Jews were given back their homeland in the post-World War II era. Hinduism, our second ethical religion, is based off of ancient texts called the Vedas. The Vedas were actually not written down for a really long time. The Aryan people, who were Indo-European people, which are actually relatives to the Jews, are going to wander into what we call the Indian subcontinent. And they are going to create a political and social system that's based off of their religious beliefs. The ethical codes are put together through the caste system. And basically there's three main ideas in Hinduism. Each individual within their caste system has jobs that they have to fulfill within that caste. That's called their dharma. Their role in this life is called dharma. If they fulfill their dharma, then they will have a positive karma, and that karma, the positive karma, will result in reincarnation into a higher caste or into a higher sex. Women are considered to be lower caste than men, and in order to reincarnate into a higher caste, then you must be a good wife, a good mother. You must fulfill your role in each of those castes. And as you go through the caste system, you will ultimately reach an enlightened state of being where you become one with their main spirit, Hindu's main spirit, called the Brahmin. The Brahmin is this state of being, of enlightenment, that you can ultimately reach by acting correctly in this world. New belief systems that developed that created universal truths and they spread are Christianity and Buddhism. Buddhism counters Hinduism in many ways. It says that all can reach nirvana, or this enlightenment, in this life. It states that you don't have to necessarily go through the reincarnation process, that no matter what caste you're in or what gender you are, you could reach nirvana in this life. Reincarnation is not necessary at all in Buddhism. And the castes don't matter. Ashoka was a Buddhist leader in the Merion dynasty who actually allowed for the spread and encouraged the spread of Buddhism. Buddhism is a very peaceful religion, a very pacifist religion. They don't like war, they don't like fighting. And there's two forms of Buddhism, Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada Buddhism is the pure Indian Buddhism. This is what the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, intended for Buddhism to be. As Buddhism spread out of India and into Asia, the rest of Asia, into China and into Southeast Asia, Buddha became a godlike figure. He became a figure of worship. And that will result into a new form of Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism. Both of these forms of Buddhism encourage the living in a monastery. The idea is that the idea of Buddhism is that the only way you can reach enlightenment is to stop desiring things. Well, the easiest way not to desire things is to cut yourself off from society and from material wealth. And the easiest way to do that is to go live in a monastery. Here's where Buddhism does become a little bit sexist, because there were not monasteries developed for women, and women were not welcome in the monasteries. Women were unable to reach that lack of desire because they do not have access to the same system that men had. They also do a lot of missionary work. Almsgiving and taking care of others is a big part of becoming enlightened, and it is a big part of the Buddhist religion in general. Confucianism also develops during this time period. Confucianism is a philosophy, not a religion. The difference is that a religion has a central worship figure. Confucius does become a godlike figure for many people in China later, but Confucianism, we like to study Confucianism as a philosophy, not a religion. It developed during the Warring States period, where there was mass chaos and nobody knew who was in charge. Confucius' idea was that peace would be maintained if everyone followed the 5 right relationships. In other words, if you treated each other in the way that you were supposed to, in regards to your relationship to other people. So if children respect their parents, if wives respect their husbands, if friends respect friends, and you act accordingly in those different levels of relationships, then peace will be maintained. This translates into political philosophy with the idea that the emperor, or the leader of the government, is meant to be the example. He's meant to be this father-like figure who is ruling the people with benevolence and caring, and that he will act correctly towards the people, and the people as a result will maintain peace because they will want to emulate their emperor. Taoism also develops during the Warring State period, and it's the idea of being balanced with nature. Taoism, water is an important metaphor in Taoism, and the idea that water is peaceful, it finds its own path, but it finds a path that is one with nature. It doesn't really fight against nature. Taoism does not necessarily have a huge influence on politics because there is no political philosophy with Taoism, but it does influence medicine, art, and architecture within China especially. In regards to medicine, you can see this with acupuncture. Acupuncture is when you use needles to unblock the humors of your body. The idea is that sickness comes as a result of your body being blocked, of there being some kind of issue within your physical form. And the way to solve that is to unblock it through meditation with the aid of needles within certain pinpoints on the body. The Chinese believe that the body has specific pressure points that control all of your systems. So if you have an upset stomach, you would put a needle somewhere that would connect to the stomach. If you have headaches, there would be a needle and a spot that could help unblock the energy that is needed to heal that area. Christianity was founded during the Roman Empire. It's based off of the ethical monotheism of Judaism. The same capital G-O-D of Judaism is the same capital G-O-D of Christianity. The Christians will add the idea of hell, which they actually got from Zoroastrianism coming out of Persia. Jesus is a Messiah figure who came to earth to bridge the gap between God and human. Christians, as a result, were persecuted and limited, but eventually the spread forced political acceptance. Political acceptance from the Roman Empire came in the form of the Edict of Milan under Constantine. Constantine said that you can no longer persecute Christians. And then Theodosius the Great ultimately made Christianity the official religion of Rome. Because the Roman Empire was so large, this is going to have a huge impact on Europe as a whole. Christianity will spread throughout the entirety of the Roman Empire, and it sticks. It stays. Despite the political instability of the Middle Ages, the Christian church and Christianity in general will maintain its power, and it will actually expand throughout the Middle Ages. The Greeks and the Romans, while they had gods, they did not necessarily feel that they had anything to do with this life. They felt that the gods were more stories. They were myths. The gods did not necessarily cause earthquakes or volcanoes to erupt. What the Greeks and the Romans decided was that there's logical explanation for everything in nature, that you don't have to attach some type of nature god to natural events, and that there's science behind everything. And the Greco-Roman ideals are going to expand into political power as well. The idea that all humans are equal, because if you look at divine right or kingship or anything like that, the gods set people apart for leadership. Well, if the gods have no control over this world, then there's no reason for the gods to set up for leadership. And so they develop political ideas like democracy. They develop ideas that every human is logical, every human is an individual, every human has something to contribute to this world. All of these ideas are going to be lost throughout the Middle Ages, and they don't resurface until the Renaissance in 1450. Belief systems did affect gender roles. In Hinduism, women were subservient to men. In Buddhism, women were not accepted into monasteries. In Confucianism, women were there to support their husbands and be mothers. The idea of filial piety, the idea that elders are more important than children and deserve to be respected. In Christianity, women were equal in original teachings. However, the politics of the church changed that. And throughout the Middle Ages, women became more and more subservient to men, to the point where women were called the sisters of Eve, and that women caused the downfall of man. Those ideas of Eve being the problem and Eve creating the separation between God and man in the Garden of Eden developed throughout the Middle Ages. That women are temptresses and women are there to distract men. And overcoming that distraction is a sign of your good Christian beliefs, and just these ideas are going to be prevalent throughout European Middle Ages. Judaism, women have very specific roles and through prayer and through meal preparation and through different ceremonies, but they are equal with men. They are on the same level as men. Other religions and cultural traditions continued despite the development of these codified religions. Shamanism is a belief system that is based off of magic. The idea that the earth has a magical ability to renew. It's very nature-based, but really what it is chemistry. Animism is obviously still going to exist, especially in areas where these codified religions are not going to get to. In the Americas, Africa, remote areas of Southeast Asia. And then, of course, ancestor worship is going to prevail in both Africa and in Asia. Even though Buddhism comes into Asia, ancestor worship, because Buddhism does not necessarily require the worship of a godlike figure, even though Buddha does become a god, it does not negate ancestor worship. Asians have a tendency to feel that ancestors have something to do in this world, and that if your job is to revere them as part of the whole family filial piety idea, that they will have to continue to acknowledge the ancestors in this world in order to have peace in this world. The Africans also feel this way as well. We also have to, when we're talking about culture, we also have to consider art. We have new literature and drama that develops amazing new architecture during this time period, lots of sculptures, and all of the different empires will have different cultural aspects to them. So for example, literature, we can look at the Greek tragedies and comedies. Examples of that are Oedipus Rex for your tragedy and Lysistrata for your comedy. The story of Oedipus Rex, most of your Greek tragedies are the same. There's some kind of oracle who predicts the downfall of a certain central figure, usually a man, and that ultimately the humans will self-fulfill their bad oracles. And they, despite what man tries to avoid, we end up causing our fate to come true anyway. And that the downfall of man is pride. That pride will always cause the fall of man. Lysistrata is actually a comedy between the sexes. Lysistrata is the story of basically the women were demanding more rights and more freedom. The men said no. So the women locked themselves up in the Acropolis and wouldn't come out. Ultimately, the men begged them to come back out because they were starving, they smelled because their clothes weren't clean, and they were also desiring of women's attention. So it's the idea of women may be lesser in society, but ultimately, women do have quite a lot of power over men. Again, it's a comedy. Indian epics, we have the Bhagavad Gita. A lot of your Indian stories have religious undertones and have teachings within them. In class, you read the Ramayana, just the stories of ethical behavior, fulfilling your dharma, reincarnating into the next life. All of your Indian epics have those same themes. When we're looking at architecture, you have very distinct styles with the Greco architecture, Indian architecture, Roman architecture, and Mesoamerican architecture, and I'm gonna, through the next few slides, you can see examples of those. One of the most interesting things about the Greek age is that their artistic techniques are going to spread. We actually see Hellenistic Greco-Roman Buddhas all the way over into Asia. So you can see that there's a huge influence of the Greco-Roman world even into Asia due to massive new trade systems. Here you can see some Greek columns. The amount of math and understanding that it took to make these and then make them aesthetically beautiful is very impressive that the Greeks are able to accomplish this. Here is a Hindu temple in South Delhi. You can see the unique Indian architecture. We have a unique dome. The dome is a little bit different. However, the dome spread into India from the Roman world. You can also see the use of columns here, but they are distinctive in their own form. Mesoamerican architecture used steep pyramids, much like what we find in Mesopotamia. And they are going to use these pyramids in their religious ceremonies. Here you can see the Pantheon and Rome. This is in the middle of Rome. You can actually, there's a McDonald's right across the street from this. You can see the Greco-Roman columns are there, but the height and the massiveness of what the Romans were building was unique. No one built on the same scale as the Romans. The Romans also figure out concrete, and concrete's going to help in building their roads and all of their buildings as well. And again, you can see the geometry that's associated with the architecture. Here are your Buddhas that are very Greco-Roman. You can see some of the European features in the face. The nose and the chin are actually European in nature rather than Asian. Key concept 2.2 is about the development of states and empires. The number and size of imperial societies grew dramatically by imposing political unity on areas where previously there had been competing states. Example of empires you have to know: Rome, Han China, Persia, Merion and Gupta India. This is ultimately the Roman Empire. This is the largest it ever got. You do need to make sure that you understand that warfare was part of expansion for all of these empires. A couple wars you probably want to know are the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars were with Carthage. Carthage is on the tip of Africa, and there were a series of 3 wars which Rome ultimately wins, which gives them control over northern Africa, which ultimately gives them control of the Mediterranean Sea completely. Then you have Caesar. Julius Caesar goes up into Gaul, or what is modern-day France, and expands into Europe on a very large scale. And each emperor successfully added to the empire as we go through. Here's the Persian. A couple wars another war you probably want to know is the Persian War with the Greeks. This is the Persian Empire, and you can see Greece right there barely holding on. The key to this was that the Greeks were able to defeat a massive Persian army with very few soldiers. Part of that is because of their military strategies with the phalanx and their shields that they used in order to protect their troops. So they had very advanced weaponry and very advanced strategies for war. The Han dynasty is going to be able to get this large. They're going to have to deal with northern nomads, and one of the biggest things that they're going to do is expand on the Great Wall already started by the Qin dynasty. Here you can see the Merion Empire at its height. The Indian subcontinent is never fully unified. It's only unified completely under the British Empire. You can see that they did not quite get the tip of India down at the bottom, nor did the Meryons manage to expand into Sri Lanka. This is the largest extent under Aurangzeb, and eventually this will fall apart soon after Aurangzeb's death. Here's the Gupta Empire, which predated the Mauryan. You can see that it really followed the Ganges River Valley and was limited by the Himalayan mountains. So the Gupta Empire was a limited empire. It was really just more of a series of alliances rather than an actual full empire. However, Pataliputra, the capital city, was built during this time period. Beautiful architecture, really advanced city for the time period. Empires and states developed new techniques of imperial administration based in part on the success of earlier political forms. So, what you need to know about Rome. Rome was an imperial system with the Senate and Roman governors. The Senate was really just there for show. Remember, the Romans are all about democracy, but they don't actually use it. However, if the emperor was bad in any way, or if the emperor ticked off the Senate, then he would ultimately die. The Roman governors were sent out by best friends. The Roman governors were usually best friends with the emperor, and the Roman governors had to be also militarily strong. The 12 Tables was a law code written by the Romans that actually ensured equality amongst all the people, well, men. The emperor had absolute control, but the emperorship was an inherited position. A couple emperors you definitely need to know for the AP exam. Augustus, he was the first emperor. Of course, Constantine, he was towards the end. He's the one who moves the capital city over to Constantinople, ultimately destroying the Roman Empire in the end. Persia was an imperial system with satraps. Satraps were basically governors. However, the Persians were very different. Cyrus, Xerxes, and Darius actually used the locals in controlling their people, and that was something that was very appealing to them. The Persians were very religiously tolerant as well, so they did not force their beliefs or try to make the territories that they conquer Persian, which is very different from the Romans. When the Romans conquered a territory, they made them speak Latin, they made them become Roman. They had a whole Romanization program. The Persians did not care about that. They really wanted the goods and the trades that the trade that was going on in the regions. Darius did write some law codes on the Rock Pillar Edicts. The Rock Pillar Edicts were different in each region that they conquered. So he created law codes that were based off of the territories and what the territories needed. Han China was an imperial system. They used a civil service exam to create jobs for the bureaucracy. So in order to gain a government job, you had to pass a civil service exam based off of Confucian ideas. Merion and Gupta used local lords for control, and they created alliances with these local lords, and they tied them to the emperor through the economics. Two emperors you need to know are Babur and Ashoka. Babur was the first emperor, and then of course Ashoka was a very benevolent ruler, very religiously tolerant. He managed to create quite a lot of peace on the Indian subcontinent during his rule, and he of course was Buddhist. Imperial governments projected military power over large areas using a variety of techniques, including diplomacy, developing supply lines, building fortification, defensive walls and roads, and drawing new groups of military officers and soldiers from local populations or conquered people. Rome had their Roman legionnaires, and these legionnaires were highly trained military men. And the way that they guaranteed the loyalty of the legionnaires was that when they won, they could have whatever they want when they conquered. The Roman roads are very famous, especially with the use of concrete. This is not only going to aid the movement of their military troops and, of course, the legislation of the massive Roman Empire, but it's also going to make trade flourish, and people are happy when they can feed their people. One of the coolest things that the Romans built was Hadrian's Wall. A territory that the Romans were not able to conquer was Scotland, and instead of dealing with them, they decided just to build this massive wall. It was way more intense than what the Great Wall was. They had barracks, they had a whole town sitting on the wall on the border just to protect it. Persia also developed a massive road system, especially between the 4 capitals that they had. Again, super important to the development of trade during this time period. Han China built the Great Wall, of course, and they also had a large road system. And Merion and Gupta didn't build anything at all. They did build a capital city, but that was it. They didn't expand trade. They didn't necessarily involve themselves with trade. Much of the success of the empires rested on their promotion of trade and economic integration by building and maintaining roads and issuing currencies. We already talked about that. Rome and China were at the 2 ends of the Silk Road network. The Romans also controlled Mediterranean sea trade, and of course they made coins, and the coins always had the emperor on it. Persia also had their own coins, and they were the middle of the Silk Road. If you remember our trade activity, the middlemen usually won the game because they were in the middle and they could collect from both sides. Han China used barter. They never developed a coinage system. And they didn't promote economic wealth due to Confucianism, and they really traded only for the purpose because Europeans wanted their silk. Merion and Gupta allowed trade, but they didn't have much economic involvement. Economics in India was always an independent concept. Imperial societies displayed unique social and economic dimensions. Cities served as centers of trade, public performance of religious rituals, and political administration for states and empires. Here's where you want to go back and study your city charts. Remember, you need to understand Persepolis for Persia, Cheyenne for Han China, Pataliputra for Merion and Guptas, Athens for Greece. We studied several Roman cities: Carthage, Rome, Alexandria, and Constantinople. And of course, the Mayans also built Teotihuacan. All of these cities were centers of religion. They were all centers for trade. They were all centers for political administration. These capital cities were really important to the development and the maintenance of their empires. The social structures of all empires displayed hierarchies that included cultivators, laborers, slaves, artisans, merchants, elites, and caste groups. In Rome, you had that all-important patron-client relationship. The Romans had a very capitalistic society to them when you became rich because you worked hard in Rome. Plebeians and patricians existed, and the plebeians were the low class. Plebeians will ultimately gain some representation in Rome. The patricians are obviously going to be your rich people. Now, the Romans didn't do any of their labor. They were all middle class. True Romans were all middle class. Instead, they used slaves for their hard labor, like road building or building their great monuments. Persia also used a slave for their hard labor. Han China had the Confucian system, which means that they didn't have merchants, but they also didn't have slaves. The predominant social class in China has always been peasantry. It's still the case today. The majority of the Chinese people live in rural villages still today. That system just prevails throughout all of history. There's a huge continuity for China right there. Merion and Gupta obviously have their caste system. Imperial societies relied on a range of labor systems to maintain the production of food and provide rewards for the loyalty of the elites, including corvée. What the corvée system is basically the Chinese are going to use it, and of course the Inca are as well. Corvée is basically a labor tax. Each family owed a certain amount of time to labor for the state. So you would have to go work on building a road or work on the Great Wall for so much of your life. Slavery, obviously slavery is a system that was used up until the 1800s. Paying rent on the land and tribute so that if you are an outlying area and you don't want to get attacked, then you pay the emperor some money. Peasant communities are obviously going to maintain most of the food for the elites, and then of course individual families would create their own products, especially in their own, especially in regards to food. Rome and Persia, of course, had slave labor. They often dealt with slave revolts. They were usually pretty successful at putting them down. Han China used the corvée, and the Merion Gupta used the caste system to provide for their labor needs. Patriarchy continued to shape gender and family relations in all imperial societies of this period. Rome personifies this through the paterfamilias. The head of the Roman family was the male figure. In Han China, Confucianism continued to support the inequality amongst the genders, and of course Hinduism is going to continue to support those gender roles in India. The Roman Han, Merion, and Gupta empires created political, cultural, and administrative difficulties that they could not manage, which eventually led to their decline, collapse, and transformations into successor empire states. So basically, they got too big. They caused massive environmental damage like deforestation, desertification, and everything else. And basically, because of the lack of food and environmental pressures, you get social tensions. Social tensions will lead to economic problems, and the wealth ends up in the hands of the elite. People get mad, you'll have fall of empire. External problems also were created for all of these empires. They kept getting attacked by nomads from the north. Northern China is going to have a problem with the Xiongnu. The Gupta are going to be attacked by the White Huns, and then the Roman are going to be taken out by the Germanic tribes. Remember, we have charts on all of this, so you should go back and study those things.